and we are going to begin. So, tonight's class is about Jewish names. Hopefully, we will be able to get to the mystical, the legal, and the utilitarian. That means the usefulness of names. So, according to tradition, the Jews of ancient Egypt kept their mode of clothing, their language, and their Hebrew names. And because of these three things, we were worthy of being redeemed from Egypt. Isn't that a beautiful baby? Don't worry, it's not one of mine. Okay, so the question is, when does a person acquire the Jewish name? So a baby boy acquires his name at the 8 days old at a Brit Milah, and baby girls get their Hebrew name when a family member or just the rabbi declares their name at the Torah, at a Torah reading. The rabbi or Torah reader recites a prayer for the health of the mother and the child. The father provides the name that the parents have chosen. This is for baby girl. Since the Torah is the source of all good things, granting a name in the presence of the Torah infuses the name with blessing. According to the Zohar, one's Jewish name is the channel by which your life force reaches a person from above. If you notice, this is not a typo. A word above is spelled with a capital A. Kabbalists say when parents name a child, they experience prophecy, since a child's destiny is wrapped up in the combination of Hebrew letters that make up his or her name. So, for example, when I was in yeshiva, one of my classmates in Beit Midrash got married really early. He was 20 years old when he got married. And when I was in yeshiva, let's see, how old was I? 23. He was 24, and he already was having his fourth baby, single births, no twins or triplets. And what happened was a family member had been killed in a horrible car accident, and they had come to the rabbi because the person had passed away pretty young, and they wanted permission, what he thought, actually, insight, about naming the baby after this loved one who had died in this tragic car accident, and they had never married. They were just young, very young. So do you want to name a person after someone who had passed away so young? So the rabbi said, you can do it, but you should try to add an additional name so that you add spiritual energy through those extra letters of a Hebrew name. Now, the person's name, I can't remember because it was over close to 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago. So what happened was, let's say the name was Yaakov Yosef. And what happened was, when it came time, so they were going to call the baby Yaakov Yosef Yechiel, which means God will live forever, Yechiel. So what happened was, at the baby naming, at the Brit Milah, the moil leans over and says, Vayikra Shemo b'Yisrael, and the baby's name amongst the people of Israel will be called. The father recites the wrong name. Instead of saying Yaakov Yosef, he said, instead of saying Yosef Yaakov, he said Yaakov Yosef. He reversed them. Yaakov Yosef Yechiel. So they called it out, and everyone goes, oh, yeah, very nice, very nice. And then when it came to the second part, when he repeats it, he goes, and the baby's name is, in Hebrew, Vayikra Shemo, Hayeled Harach Namul. And he goes, so the guy says, well, which one is it? Is it Yaakov Yosef? Because you said Yaakov Yosef the first time, now you said Yosef Yaakov. And back then we didn't videotape these things. So they went to the Rabbi and they said to the Rabbi, Rabbi Goldstein, well, what should we do, Rabbi? Because I accidentally called him by the reverse names. It was supposed to be Yosef Yaakov Yechiel, and it came out Yaakov Yosef Yechiel. And the Rebbe said, there's a tradition that an angel sits on your shoulder, so to speak, of the mother and father when they decide the name of the baby. And you know the story about Moshe Rabbeinu? When Moses was a little baby growing up in Pharaoh's house, the magicians foresaw that Moshe would steal the crown of Pharaoh. So they said to Pharaoh, you have to kill him because he's going to usurp your authority. So Pharaoh goes, let's test him. And they brought gold and the crown on one plate, and they brought hot coals on another plate. They were both shining and glittering because the whole coals were, what's the correct term? So it says that Moshe put out his hand to grab the crown, but then they put him to death. So an angel pushed his hand. He grabbed the hot coal. And what does a baby do when he touches something hot? They go like this, ow! And that's how Moses burnt his lips and he spoke with a speech impediment for the rest of his life. So what does this have to do with picking names? So Rabbi Goldstein said that there's an angel that directs a parent, both parents, in giving the name. So if you reverse the names, then let's keep it that way. And the mother of the baby was very pleased. Why? Because the gematria of the name was the same, the numerical value of the name, just the names were reversed. And of course, they also added the name Yechiel, that God will live strongly forever. So all this being said, the first slide tonight is supposed to teach everyone that your name is empowering. Your name has spiritual energy. Where you get it and how you get it, and the actual conceptualization of your parents. Now, the question is, so then why isn't a baby boy named after the Torah? If the Torah reading infuses the environment with energy to enter into the baby girl, then why isn't a baby boy named after the Torah? The answer is because the great mitzvah of circumcision empowers the spiritual energy that's necessary to direct the time and life of the baby boy. Let's see, no chats. Okay, just do a quick look. You have like 26 people, very good. Okay, I found this, and it was actually a discussion I found online. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. So popularity of Hebrew boy names from 1900 to 2018. So the discussion here was, if you look, prior to 1900, there were actually a lot of Hebrew names in America. Think about it. Benjamin Franklin, Levi, the name Levi, they were all very, very biblical names. Nathaniel, Hawthorne, all biblical names. In the 1700s and the early 1800s, a lot of biblical names. And then it slowly weaned. But then you can see by can anyone shout out when was the highest peak in Jewish names? I'm sorry, not Jewish names. Let's say Bible names or Hebrew names in America. See the first, what year do you think this is?
After the Holocaust.
Exactly. So the whole discussion I found online was that America and the West were so sensitive to the death of the Jewish people that here in America, there was a movement to turn more biblical, and a lot of biblical names were used. I think sometimes it's just cyclical. I think mothers and fathers naming children is absolutely generational and cyclical. And then the second one, so then the question was, what happened in 1982, 83 that the number spiked pretty high again? Does anyone know? All right, so I'll just lead you because that one's a really strange one. That's when the Marine barracks was blown up in Beirut. And my response was like, and? Because a Marine barracks was blown up in Beirut here in America, people started. So the idea is that our hearts went out to these Marines who perished, trying to bring peace to the Middle East, and therefore family members named their children more biblical names. I don't know. My idea is I'm just going to share with you the thoughts and the concepts. Is that Stacy?
Yes. How is James a Hebrew name?
Ha! Actually, I have a slide on it. It might be even next, but I'll answer it now just in case it isn't. So I totally agree with you, except in Latin America, Chaim is Jaime, and Jaime is spelled Jaimes.
Okay.
And I looked it up in the Encyclopedia of Names, not the Encyclopedia of Jewish Names. And guess what it says? James is based on the Hebrew power of life, Chaim. So I thought
Thank you.
that was also pushing the envelope, but don't shoot me, I'm only the messenger. These are the 25 most popular names in America last year. And Liam, Noah, these the ones in red are Jewish or Hebrew. Liam, Noah, Elijah, Levi, Asher, Ezra, Ethan and Aden? Yeah, Eitan. That means God has given. Benjamin, Jack, it's usually Jacob, and Daniel. What? Liam is Jewish? No, it's not. It's Irish. And the answer is Liam. My people are mine. And this is a picture of a young boy. He was 20 years old at the time. He was actually nominated, but didn't make it for the Nobel Peace Prize. This Jewish college student named Liam Elkind coordinated 2,700 volunteers and distributed food packages to 20,000 vulnerable people in New York and New Jersey at the height of the pandemic. Now, regarding Liam, just this past Shabbat, my son was here, and one of his closest friends is I forgot his name, Sofer. What's his first name? Eyal Sofer, who's married to Leora. Got Leora's maiden name. And guess what their son's name is? Liam. Not Liam, but Liam. And Sofer, everyone calls him Sofer. His father is Israeli and his mother is Argentinian. And Leora's parents are, I think his mother's Israeli and his father's American. Arnowitz. Maybe you remember Arnowitz. Their father was a big macher in Federation. He was a high-level employee. And the father, Leora's father, now runs Boys Town, Jerusalem. So the whole idea is that it's interesting that in 2022, there seems to have been a splurge that 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, almost half of the most popular names were biblical names. And it's definitely cyclical. So, yes.
Rabbi, you'd repeat again what was the meaning of Ethan and Aden?
Eitan, God has given, or gift of God.
Both names mean the same thing, Aden and
So the letters
Ethan.
T and the letter D are what's called dentals. That means they're pronounced in the same part of your palate, and that's why in many linguistic studies, the letter T and the letter D are interchangeable. So, for example, there are 6 letters in Hebrew. If they get a dot in it, it's called a dagesh. It changes the pronunciation. For example, Shabbat and Shabbos. So if you put a dot in the top, it becomes a T. If you remove the dot, it becomes a S sound. So one of the letters, the 6 letters, is a Daled, like we would pronounce a D. But if you put a dot in it, and if you know any Yemenites, they actually differentiate between a Daled and a Talid. And it's beautiful to hear them read the Torah, because we know how to differentiate between a pei and a fei, a taf and a saf, a shin and a sin, examples are, a bet and a vet, but there are other letters. So Ethan and Aden are actually related because the T and the D can be interchanged linguistically.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so let's say naming after the living. This has to do with spiritual energies. So Ashkenazi tradition maintains that naming a child after a living relative is bad luck. The angel of death might take the baby by mistake when coming for the elder relative. Now, this is a very, very holy concept. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Baba Misa. But Baba Misa or not, I don't know anyone in the Ashkenazi community that would ever name a baby after the living. In fact, in my own household, we've had the situation where um, Judy's father passed away. His name was Philip, and his middle name was Benjamin. But everyone called him Pinsi because his Hebrew name was Pinchas, Philip Pinchas. So what happens when he passed away? Ayala had just gotten pregnant, and we didn't say anything. And then they called us like after the baby was born to say that there's a problem. That Ayala's father, his name is Pinchas, and they can't name the baby Pinchas because her father's alive and his name is Pinchas. So in my father-in-law's English name was Philip Benjamin, Pinchas Benjamin. So they reverse the names, and it's Benjamin Pinchas, and they call him Benny. Everyone thinks that he's named after my father, who was Benjamin. The answer is no, he's named after my father-in-law, a great man. So here's the whole thing about the Ashkenazi tradition and how it affected my family. It affected my family also in another way, that my brother-in-law, Simcha, you've heard me talk about him, he's an Orthodox Scottish Jew. And he met my sister, they got married, they had 4 children, they live in Israel. And interesting story is he saved a person's life in the army, not militarily. I don't remember exactly the situation, but he saved the person's life. And 9 months later, he had a baby boy, the man whose life he saved. And he called him up and said, I want you to be the Sandek. And he said, I'll try my best. He goes, no, you don't try your best. You have to be there. Simcha showed up to the bris. And he thought he was only going to be the Sandek. He was a Sephardi man and a Sephardi wife. Not only did he hold the baby during the circumcision, they called the baby Simcha after him. And, at first he was, really, really happy, but my sister got really, really concerned that they named the baby after him. So shouldn't you really just worry about the baby? And the answer is no, because there's another Ashkenazi Baba Maisa that two neshamas can't abide with the same email address, so to speak, and that the additional life will suck spiritual energy out of the person. Now flip the coin and let's talk about the Sephardi world. Like one more thing about Ashkenazi world is that under no circumstances can you name a child after yourself. There's no John Kennedy II, John Kennedy III, John Kennedy IV. Doesn't happen. Not in the Ashkenazi world and not in the Sephardi world. It's considered the epitome of arrogance to name a child after yourself. Now, I will tell you that in Dutch society, I have a brother-in-law. His name is Joseph Anthony van Zwaren. And guess what his father's name was? Joseph Anthony van Zwaren. However, in the Orthodox community, it was meaningless because only your Hebrew names count. So Yossi's Hebrew name is Yosef, and his father's name was Eliezer. So the rabbi had no problem. You can call your kid anything you want. Now, with the exception of some of the more liberal Reform Jews, this practice was seldom observed, and it was different Hebrew names when given to each. Now, regarding the Sephardi world, I'll stop the share for a minute. In the Sephardi world, it's just the opposite. In the Sephardi world, if a son does not name his child after one of his parents, it's a tremendous insult. When I first came to Temple Menorah, we had, I think it was 3 Leon Egozis in shul, all named after their grandfather. And we still have one of them, Leon Egozi, who's married to Susie. So how do we differentiate them for billing purposes? Each Leon had his wife's first name as his middle name. Because the other thing is Sfaradim don't have 2 names. It's not like Eliyahu Tzvi, Elliot Hirsch. No, they only have 1 name. By the way, calling Sfaradim up to the Torah is so easy because it's always like Yehuda, Ben Aryeh, Ben Yehuda, Ben Aryeh. They're all named after their fathers, after their grandfathers. It's really easy to keep records. By the way, speaking of which, have you ever been to a Jewish cemetery and you go into the Sephardi section, also the Russian section, and you'll see a picture, a cameo photograph on the grave? Mort's probably seen this 1,000 times. And you know why Sephardim have a picture of the deceased on the matzeva? Because how do you know you're standing at the right Yehuda ben Aharon? Because there might be 5 or 6 of them. So they put a photo up there to make sure. And then when his wife is buried next door to them, then it's easier to identify them. But that's why frequently you'll actually see it was for practical reasons, not for being arrogant. So let's get back to the share.
Rabbi, I have a question. What,
Please.
in the Ashkenazim, why can't you name a child after two? And so that you said that your grandson was named after Judy's parent, but that it was similar to your father's name. Why can't you say we're naming the baby after both parents? Which is what we did in our family. So it just, to make things easier and to smooth everything up and or is that just not done?
No. In fact, it has a lot to do with family politics. So, for example, in my family, again, I love telling true stories from my family, but I have a brother-in-law who Lubavitch, and he wanted to name his firstborn son Yosef Yitzchak, named after one of the Lubavitcher Rebbes. And my father wanted the first baby born after the passing of his father, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. So my brother-in-law's idea is I'll take one name from the Rebbe and one name from the grandfather, and we'll mix them. And my father's attitude is, you're more than welcome to do that. This is your child, but don't think that wasn't my father's name. My grandfather's name was Yosef Chaim. I'm not going to tell you who to name your baby after, but my father said that his father's name was Yosef Chaim, not Yitzchak, whatever, Yosef Yitzchak. So that being said, a lot of it has to do with just how people feel about it. Naming babies is one of the biggest family fights and that I had to get involved in was, actually, I'll tell you two. One of them was Sephardi family married a Sephardi man married an Ashkenazi woman, and the first baby, and she said, "There's no way. I'll make up a name because I don't want anyone to figure it out. No way you're naming my son Harold." But that was my father's name because, yeah, that's really nice, but we're not naming my son Harold. It was especially 25 years ago. It was like, you can't name a kid Harold 25 years ago. That was one situation. And another situation was similar. It had to do with a Holocaust survivor whose mother had a very European name. Let's say, now it's not so bad. I'm trying to think of a real European name like Basha. And this young couple said, Zeta, I cannot name a girl Basha. So yes, you can. Zeta, you just can't name a girl, 2000, you can't name her Basha. And that was another family issue that got involved. But I have to tell you that when I was in college, someone wanted to set me up with a girl named Ethel. And I said, I ain't going out with no Ethel. And you can imagine the nasty things I said. And then we were at a party where everyone was set up on dates. So, it was yeshiva, Yeshiva University's thing. And let me tell you something. Ethel was one of the most attractive, intelligent, sensitive, and an acquaintance of mine ended up marrying her. But here's the whole point. Yeah, her legal name was Ethel, but everyone called her Etty. And they're married and they have like 10 kids, and he's a very prominent businessman in New York. And I still see him once in a while. Last time I saw him actually was at APAC, the last APAC. before COVID. But the whole point is that naming is very, very sensitive. But I have to tell you, I can't think of a better reason of naming a girl Ethel if the grandmother was a charming, sensitive, attractive, shomer mitzvah, and that's the type of, person you want your children and grandchildren to be. And I have to
I
tell
think-
you, go ahead.
I think Ethel is like short for Ethlyn.
That I don't know. I know it's definitely a Yiddish name.
Because I had a
Ethel.
friend Ethlyn, and we used to call, she came from Ethel, then
Yeah.
I guess, don't know.
Okay. Absolutely. So, let's see. I think we already handled this. Right. Hebrew names are used in prayer, in and out of synagogue, and for other religious rituals. When a person is called up in synagogue for an aliyah, he's called up by his Hebrew name, the son of his father's Hebrew name. The names that appear on a ketubah, marriage contract, or on a get, writ of divorce, are the Hebrew names in the legalistic form as that of an aliyah. Now, is it sexist? You have to take all of these things into consideration, the time in which these things develop. So, for example, do you think that 30 years ago or 40 years ago, if a woman got married and changed her name to her spouse's name, that was sexist? 40 years ago, that was the standard. My daughter-in-law, Ayala, chose not to change her name. The children, don't even have a hyphenated name. It's Eli Melech Perlson. It's Benjamin Philip Perlson. It's Masha, Chaya, Perlson. But Ayala kept her maiden name. You want to ask me if it bothers me? Hell no. What do I care? My son doesn't care. Why should I? What's the big deal? In retrospect, I was very, very happy that Judy changed her name to Perlson. But today, I don't think I would have been so insulted as I would have been 40 years ago. So all this has to do with, you got to make sure that you talk about these things and think about these things in the time that Jewish law and tradition was evolving. And therefore, it was not considered misogynist or sexist that you were called up the Torah using your father's name. By the way, here's an interesting halacha, that if the community knows that you are adopted, let me repeat that. If the community knows that you are adopted, you're allowed to be called up to the Torah using your adopted father's name. Because everyone knows you're just doing it out of respect. But if the community doesn't know that you're adopted, then you have to use your real father's name, your biological father's. Really interesting. It's like the opposite of what you would think. So it's legalistic. Why would you want to know publicly and under those circumstances? So that your child doesn't accidentally marry a family member because, oh, I remember, what are you talking about? He used to get called up to the Torah such and such. Yeah, so all of these are legalistic reasons. When people are ill and a Mishaberach prayers are recited for their well-being, they're identified by their Hebrew names. However, they're mentioned using their mother's Hebrew name. There are many reasons for this. The classic answer is, there are always witnesses to who your birth mother is. There's midwives, there are doctors. A woman walks into a room, very pregnant. You hear a crying baby, you walk in and she's holding a baby. You know that she is the mother of the child. But there are no witnesses. There is no proof as to who your biological father is. That's why when it comes down to the mystical need to spiritually identify energy and appoint it to you, use your mother's name. When a deceased person is remembered through Yizkor prayers recited on certain holidays, the Hebrew name is used. Upon death, Jewish headstones carry the Hebrew name as well. See a lot of typos. And by the way, there's nothing wrong on a matzeva to putting the mother's name as well. There's a growing acceptance in Orthodox communities to allow the use of both a mother and father's name in most rituals. So, for example, when I was a young rabbi, I got a ketubah, and it had like Eliyahu Tzvi, son of Binyamin and Sarah Sylvia. Like, that's my parents' name. Oh my gosh, what do I do? It's such an expensive. And I called Rabbi Learfield. It doesn't invalidate it. It's no. I mean, it's not traditional. It's not the way we do things, but it doesn't invalidate the ketubah. And now, in many communities, in what we call open Orthodox, that's like the new modern Orthodox movement. And people, you walk up to the Torah for your Aliyah, and the Gabbai goes, "Your Hebrew name." If you say Eliyahu Tzvi, that's me, Ben, the son of Binyamin Visara, he'll repeat it. If you use your mother and your father's name, they'll do it. They'll do it. They, in the open Orthodox, nothing wrong with it. Okay, so let's take a break and talk because I see there's some chats. King, there's a lot. Just to follow up from the laboratory. Okay, Kaparot. King James Bible. Miriam, what's your question about King James Bible? Miriam?
His name was
That was George when you were talking about James, so he wrote that on my
Oh, I got it.
chat.
Yeah, Miriam, you better get used to that mixed
There you
use.
go,
That's
George.
going to get more and more. He's going to borrow your car. He's going to wear your shoes.
I don't know what she's talking about. What are you talking? I think what? I don't know what she's talking about. No, sorry.
Okay, they're getting married, so we're going to cut them some slack. All right, so
Thank you.
very, very, very important. That's a very important part is that King James, his name was a British king. And you'll notice that in a lot of the British monarchy names, the Christian names contain at least one biblical name. And one of the most frequent one is David.
Yes.
Okay, in a lot of the names. But in the Eastern Orthodox, in the Eastern Europeans, the Prussians and the Russians are less so. But then, we can discuss that too. Let's see, Steve, is there another question? So Steve asks the question, isn't there a tradition or custom to change your name to change your destiny? If you were named after someone that died young, for example, or some other bad situation. So if you need to be named, if a parent wants to name a child after someone like we discussed that was killed in a car accident, they usually add an additional name to begin with. But let's say, for example, a person has bad mazel, a person has bad health issues. There's actually a ritual where we change your name. Now, let me rephrase that. We add a name. We don't change your name, we add a name. And if anyone has an Art Scroll prayer book, the black one, or next time you're in shul, it's in the very back. There's a whole ritual. Now, I can't remember. We did it in shul a number of months ago, where someone. I'm sorry, Mike?
I have the Art Scroll.
Okay, so if you look in the very back, literally, turn all the way to, is it the black one? That's the RCA one. If you look in the back, after the Tehillim, after the Torah portion readings, you'll see the prayer for changing names. I don't have one right here. But regardless, to answer Steve's question, that the adding of a name changes your mazel. So a good example would be today, if you get one letter wrong on an email address, it doesn't work. The email doesn't get delivered. Well, think of the same thing. If you change an entire name or letter by adding the email, that bad email will not arrive. So the idea is that the angel of death, so to speak, will come for this young person who's very, very sick and say, I'm here for, Baruch ben Sarah. And sorry, Baruch ben Sarah is not here. This is Baruch Avraham ben Sarah. Oh, he's not on my list. And the angel of death will move on. Okay, let's see. Hebrew names are used in prayer, as we just discussed. The names that appear on a ketubah are the legalistic form. People who are ill, Mishaberach, we use the mother's name. In Yisker, we always use the father's name. There's nothing wrong, as I mentioned, more and more modern or open Orthodox communities will use both mother and father names.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, in my family, unfortunately, there were a lot of people that perished in the Holocaust. So my parents and my all his brothers and sister, most of the family was named after people that had either died in concentration camps or perished under the hands of all these evil people. So, you know, it's many of them only had one name. The name of that person that had perished. And I think it was an honor to, you know, remember their names and their lives.
So both my brother and I are named after my father's family members that died in Treblinka. I'm named after one grandfather on his wife's side, Eliyahu Tzvi, and my father's named after David Tuvia. And they both perished in Treblinka. So yeah, I understand. Now I can tell you that there's a situation that I'm aware of, an acquaintance of mine, that his wife was having a great deal of difficulty getting pregnant, and she finally got pregnant, and the doctors called them in and said, listen, this is a very, very at-risk pregnancy, and after she gives birth, this was in Israel, by the way, we highly recommend that you don't have any more children. And they really were seriously talking about tying her tubes so that she couldn't have another even accidental pregnancy because it would kill her. And what happened was they only had one child. I don't know how they made arrangements, but they only had one child. And that child, her name is Rachel Shalhevet Yah. She has 4 names. Rachel Shalhevet Yah, Miriam Sahava. Because there were 4 women who had perished in their families, who had died, not perished, they had died over the course of the years. And because they knew that they were only going to have one child, this girl has 4 names. Yeah. Like Prince Charles, like King Charles, you know, Charles, Anthony, Daniel, whatever. You know?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question. In Israel, some people just get modern Hebrew names and they don't seem to have anything else. Does that constitute a Hebrew name?
So I think I shared this story just
Me.
what Ahova.
I was given a Hebrew name, but they translated. I was born as Luba, and they decided that Luba was close enough to Ahova. And so I had to be given
Aruba,
a
I'm
Hebrew
really
name to go to
sorry, but
school.
I'm going to call you Luba from now on.
That's fine.
I love that name. Wait, you know Saul Serebnik?
But you know, let me tell you something, Rabbi.
Saul
I was
Serebnik's
really
mother
named
was
after,
Luba,
yeah,
and
I
she
was
was
really
a
named
wonderful
after,
person.
well, I was named after Aryeh Leib. So as my mother known enough to Hebrew to explain to that teacher that I'm not supposed to be Ahuva, I'm supposed to be an Ariella. But she,
No,
All
you
right.
will. That's
Listen,
very well by
that
my
happens.
family.
That happens a lot, even here in America. So, for example, people go to Hebrew school, and they go, "What's your?" You know, they go, "What's your name?" Golda, Gittel. No. Golda, you're Zahava. Gold, Zahav. They change it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that, you know, but if you look at their birth certificates or whatever, it says Golda. Yes, Miriam.
Okay, I have a question okay. So you said that when you take a boy specifically when it's a brief, you name the baby there. So what is the situation? And I'm going to talk, my question is, I thought that many years ago when I named my son, which he has 2 Hebrew names, I thought that you could, because of the angel not getting confused, you could only put one name. So I wanted to honor my grandfather who died, and his first name is Ariel, you know, and his middle name, which is his Hebrew name, is Reuben. So can that be like, that is set in stone? It's like, if I would want to call him in Hebrew Ariel Reuben, because I think it's a beautiful name and it's a beautiful meaning actually. Can that be done or not? It's what it was, it is.
No. So, talk to me and I'll teach you, now's not the time and place, but there's no problems. We can make everything happen. Hold on just a second. Forgive me, this is inadvertent.
I didn't understand your question.
My question is, I named Ariel after his grandfather,
Ariel, and then
the Hebrew name, because I thought that if you put two names, the angel can get confused.
How can an angel get
Okay,
confused?
so
Okay.
here's to respond to that. Many times in my rabbinate, people will come to me and they'll say, I asked my parents my Hebrew name and they weren't religious, or they lived out in Rehoboth, Idaho. I'll give you an example. A guy was doing his residence literally out in Iowa somewhere, and she gave birth, and he was a doctor, and she gave birth. There was no synagogue, da 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 da. And then afterwards, he stayed for his residency or his internship. I don't know the correct terms. And they were there like 6-7 years, and then they moved back to Miami Beach, and she started Hebrew school and whatever. So she never got a Hebrew name. She was never named out of the Torah. So it came time for her to get married, and we didn't know what name to use. So I called a very prominent rabbi, and he said, "What's her English name, and what's the meaning of that name?" So her parents were still alive. He goes, "Oh, it's named after my great aunt. She was a wonderful woman. She left me a lot of money because she loved me, and that was my way of honoring her." So I said, "What was her Hebrew name?" So, he said, "I'm not sure." So I said, let's Hebraicize it. Let's say from Golda, let's make it Zahava. And the rabbi informed me that for 30 days, the family should call her Zahava, or whatever that name was at the time. And by doing so, you imprint the spiritual power of the name on the person.
Okay.
And we'll talk
What about
specifics.
nicknames, Rabbi? What about nickname?
So let me tell you an interesting halacha about nicknames. You're not allowed to call a person a nickname, even if they like it. So for example, when I was in yeshiva, almost everyone, I was one of the few people that didn't, well, actually, that's not true. When I was in Lubavitch Yeshiva, they started this shtick where you wrote your name backwards, and that became your nickname. So if you look closely, Elliot Pearlson, spelt backward, is toilet nasal drip. I'm serious. And my nickname became Toilet Nasal Drip. Okay, that was my nickname. And we'd be walking in the
That's
street and
mean.
someone would scream, "Toilet!" And I'd have to turn around because that was the shtick that we did. But the whole point is, when you get to higher levels of yeshiva, Rabbi Goldstein was adamant, no nicknames. Well, that's not like Mordechai or Matityahu, they can call you Mati. But you couldn't call someone like Pink Eye, or you couldn't call him Stinky, or you couldn't call him Gimpy. You couldn't call him something that draws a negative attention to something on his body or his attitude or his perspective. So there was one young man who did have a twitch. It was an ocular twitch, and people called him Blinky. And Rabbi Goldstein, if you ever
that's
called
not
him
nice.
that, if you ever called him
That's
that,
insulting.
oh, Israelis, it was like, like they thought it was part of the whatever, so whatever. So that being said, Regina, I can't see you, but I think your hand went up.
Yes.
Please.
I just want to tell you something humorous about Sephardic naming. Ike is the fifth child in the family, and there was already 5. My mother-in-law's name was Naomi, and when I was expecting, I said, I'm not going to have 5 Naomis. And of course, I had a boy and not a girl. And my mother-in-law says, see, that's why you didn't have a girl, because you didn't want to name it Naomi. So
I think I might have told the story just last week. My brother-in-law, Heshe Weiss, and my sister Sharon, may they rest in peace. Heshe's grandmother was Esther Rachel, and every single one of them had to name their firstborn girl Esther Rachel. It was mandatory. Now, the only problem was they had made Aliyah in 1978, and giving a girl the name Esther in 1978 was like the kiss of death. So if you know the story of Purim, what was Esther's real name? Hadassah. That was her real name. Esther was her Persian name. So
I didn't know
what
that.
happens is Hadassah also was kind of too old-fashioned. So my niece's name is Hadass. Same thing. Hadass Rachel. Everyone calls her Dasi or Hadass. So the whole point is that naming is a very
That's beautiful.
dangerous.
That's Rabbi.
Yes, Mort.
Rabbi?
Mort, and then I think I heard
Liliana.
Liliana. Okay. Oh, Liliana doesn't have your name. So Mort and then Liliana.
Rabbi, as you're well aware, there's deviations in spelling of some of the names. So I've seen with like double yuds versus single yud, aleph or ayin.
Yeah.
So if you're naming after somebody and you don't have it correct.
Listen,
Okay.
I had that problem on a ketubah. Okay, and that's why I hate getting involved in this. So the girl, I'll never forget this. The girl's name was a Yiddish name, Brindle. Brindle, and one of the rabbis or family members was a rabbi, and he arranged for the ketubah using the modern Hebrew spelling. No ayins, right? Brindle. No ayins or no olives, right? And the Rav, who was the Masader Kedushin, who was not me, I was under the chuppah, took out a pen, he started scratching them, trying to fix it, and like it was a very expensive ketubah, and the rabbi was adamant because it could invalidate the ketubah if you spelled the bride's name wrong. Yeah,
Oh,
you're right, Mort. Liliana.
So within the Anusim community, they would switch their last names. For example, Liumas, if you look at it in the reverse, is Samuel, and that way they would hide that they were Jews.
Jewishness.
So, although next Tuesday night we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court, because we really have to hit that up when it's still timely. So, so that's what we're going to do next Tuesday night. But the following week, I'll continue with this theme, because as Mike Epstein brought up about Purim being a Persian name and Hadassah, and you know, we can all tie it right in for the study of Purim. But last names in the Sephardi world are also just the same exact way as that we have anglicized our Yiddish last names. People of, the Jewish Sephardi communities of Arabic lands Arabicized their Hebrew names. And we're going to discuss that also. So how about if I end on what my personal history. As you know, my last name is Perlson, and my father's last name, my father's last name, and my father's last name is Perlson. So when I was about 12, 13 years old, I asked my father, I just figured out that Zeta's last name is Kansapolsky. Why is Zeta's name Kansapolsky and your name is Perlson? And he said, when I came to America, I was at University of California, School of Agriculture at Davis, Northern California. And on like the first week of school, the Dean of Agriculture, my father wanted to be a farmer in Israel, but the British wouldn't let him in. It was 1929. So my father studied agriculture so he could become a kibbutznik eventually. So the first week of school, the dean of agriculture, his name was Dr. Brown, came to my father and said, Benjamin, think of a good last name because we're changing your name from Kansapolsky because here in Northern California, that name ain't going to fly. Not here in the university, not in the community. So my father said, but why? Why do I have to change it? He goes, listen, you think my name is Brown? It was Bruenstein. He was a professor of agriculture who grew up Jewish. He was obviously Jewish in Warsaw, but he had changed his name from Bruenstein to Brown. So my father changed his name from Kansapolsky to Perlson. So when I was 17 years old, I was full of, vegan vermin, and I graduated high school, and I was on my way to Israel, and I was going to go cross country. I said to my father, I'm going to go to Bialystok. I want to visit. He goes, no, you're not allowed to go to Poland. Swear to me you will never go to Poland. My father hated everything Polish. So I said, well, just for your information, I'm thinking changing my name back to Kansapolsky. My father goes, why would you want to change your name back to Kansapolsky? Because that was our name. That was our real name. He goes, no, it wasn't. Our real name's not Kansapolsky. What do you mean? Because in 1855, Tsar Alexander I was conscripting Jewish boys into the Russian army for 25 years. And that meant the death of you as being a Jew, because they would take you away at 10 years old and you come back in your late 30s. So what happened was my great-grandfather, David Tuvia, crossed the border into Poland and bought a dead Polish man's legal papers, came back to Bialystok and registered as a resident alien, a Pole, Kansapolsky. By doing so, the Russians wouldn't want him in the army because they don't want foreigners. You can't trust a foreigner to fight in your army. That's how my great-grandfather got out of the Russian army. So I go, great. If it's not Kansapolsky, what's our real name? He goes, Abramowitz. Our real name was Abramowitz. So I go, should I change it back to Abramowitz? He goes, if you want to, but I think that was our name only for like 50 or 60 years. And I go, what? Because before that, you didn't have to have last names.
So you're Rabbi Abramowitz.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Always telling us.
And we weren't
Rabbi,
Temple Menorah has had 2 Rabbi Abramowitzes.
Rabbi,
Yes, Mike.
Reincarnation.
I have a joke with names. I have to tell you a
Please.
joke. Listen to my joke. The Oriental man is standing in line trying to getting his driver's license in New Jersey. The clerk asks him what's his name, and he says, my name is Charles Goldberg. So he says, your name is Charles Goldberg. It's an Oriental guy. He says, how'd you get the name like that? He says, well, when I was in Ellis Island standing on line to check in, the man in front of me was Charles Goldberg. When they asked me my name, I said, me too.
I heard it a little different. I heard he goes, what's your name? And the Chinese man said, same thing.
Same thing, right?
But how about this story? This is a true story. One of our closest friends in Asheville, and even now, they came in, they visited here, during COVID, they came to our house. The last name is Nygrosh, Mark and Liz Nygrosh. And they had twins. They couldn't get pregnant for a long time. And then huge party. When they finally gave birth, there was a huge party, and everyone came to name the baby. Well, it was a boy, a bris, and the girl's baby naming. And all of his uncles were like Rubenstein, 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 Rubenstein. His father, Nygrosh. So I said to him, like, what's the story there? Is your father adopted or something? All of your uncles have Rubenstein. He goes, no. At Ellis Island, his father, was in line, and they were sending people back to Europe for like the littlest things. Like if you had glaucoma, if you had lice, they would send you back for like crazy things. So he was standing there in line, and he was trying to make sure he would memorize the right answers. And there was a series of questions. What's your name? Do you owe any money? Because they didn't want debtors fleeing, they didn't want to become like Australia, a debtor's nation. So what happened was he got the questions out of order. He didn't speak a word of English. And to mix things up, they would ask the questions out of order. So when they asked him his name, he thought he didn't speak a word of English. They, do you owe any money? And he answered in Yiddish, nicht a groschen, which means not a penny. And they wrote down Naigrash as his name. Nicht a groschen came out as Naigrash. And that's how he got this synthetic, not real name.
Miriam's dad has the same story. You know that John Ferguson is a Jewish name. Yeah, they were coming through Ellis Island and they were asking the gentleman, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Schoen Ferguson, John Ferguson."
Just
all right.
By
the way, also, last names are also Jewish last names are only about 150 years old, and we're going to discuss that also. Some of them have to do with appearances, how the person actually looked. Other names were like what you did for a living, and others were like where you're from. Do you ever wonder, for example, why Sephardi people have a last name Ashkenazi?
Yes, I always wondered.
So I could tell you. So for example, Rabbi Luria, the great mystic who lived in Safat, he was Ashkenazi. He was one of the few Ashkenazi Jews in Sfat. Sfat was the holy city, and they're all Sfaradim. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, all of them, all of his contemporaries were famous Sephardi rabbis. So there was more than one Rabbi Yitzchak. So the question was, how do they differentiate between one rabbi named Isaac Yitzchak and the other one? He was known as Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak, and that's why he's called the Ari. Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak, the lion, Ari. But what does this have to do with being called Ashkenazi? That there are always Sfaradim living in Ashkenazi communities, and there are always Ashkenazi Jews living in Sephardi communities, going back 800-900 years. So what happens was, that was the uniqueness. By the way, do you know anyone named Holkman? I do. We have a member of the shul, Philip Holkman. You know what Holkman was? Halka mean in Yiddish? Means tall.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I know somebody named Hochgelernte.
What does it mean?
Hochgelernte. Someone who's very literate.
Very literate. Halch, tall or high, gelernter, a person, highly educated.
Yeah.
So,
Highly
you know
educated.
anyone named Kurtzer or Kurtz?
Sure.
Kurtz means short. They had to do with the way they physically appeared. Well, which Isaac do you want? The tall one or the small one? I want Yitzchak Kurtzer, the short one, the demure one.
Except when we had a tall person, we used to call him Shorty.
Yeah. That's like when a person didn't have hair, you called him curly.
Right.
And lastly, there are all kinds of names. How about what town or city you came from? Berliner, Irving Berlin. We had a Jewish Supreme Court justice. His name was Hamburg.
George Minsky.
From Minsk.
You know,
exactly.
Rabbi, I was thinking about
and we have a woman from Bimblich, right?
Yeah.
That's, I'll tell you what it means, what we think it means. It's acronym, like the acronym, we believe that my great grandfather, from my father's side, I don't know, mother or grandfather or grandmother, we don't know if they were, because they were very literal and literate and studious, or because they work with candles. So it's Bimblicht. It's the house of the light. It's the so that's where the last name is from. It's the house of the Baruch Makom something share
of light.
Yeah,
July.
so it's not
Um,
Bimblich, it's Bimblich, but they did, like when they did it in Spanish English, it's Bimblich.
So they took away
Wow.
the T. They took away the T at the
Very
end.
interesting. By the way, you
Rabbi,
know,
I was
also
wondering.
other names are like Katz. Do you know that the Jewish name, last name Katz, almost 100% they're Kohanim, because Katz is an
Yeah.
abbreviation of Kohen Tzaddik. And you know,
Mhm.
everyone knows
Katz, that's a
Levine and
Nelson.
Levi, they're Levine, they're Levis, but did you know that the last name Siegel is almost 100% of the time they're Levis, because Siegel is an abbreviation of Sagan Levi, the assistant Levi.
Right.
There are a lot of names like this that have to do with your business or your profession or who you are. I know a lot of Sephardim with the name Gabbai, because in the Ashkenazi world, it's not made a big thing, but when you were the Gabbai in the community, it was a big position of authority. You know, or how about Rabinowitz? It means the son of the head rabbi. Rabinitz, Rabinowitz. Huva, what were you going to add?
Yeah, my dad, because that's what you were saying about the Levim and the Kohanim and the names. My dad had to get a new identity after the war when they got away from the communists in Romania, and they had to change identity anyway. So my father was born as Pinkas, last name was Pinkas, and of course they were Levim. And so when he picked a name, he made sure to pick up a name that will also be a Levi name, and that's how he became a Siegel. So he was Segal after that.
You know, I heard that one of the survivors told me that that after the war, a lot of people changed their names to the towns of which they came from. So to initiate, you know, to initiate a process of finding one another. I'm sure everyone remembers that, you know, it was a very funny show. It was called The Producers. It was made by Mel Brooks. So remember the Max Bialystoker came from my father's hometown,
Bialystock and
Bialystok.
Bloom.
Right.
I know
So-
somebody named Mitrani, which means from Trani. Trani is a city in Italy.
Exactly.
So when they left Italy, they went to Turkey. That's what they use as a last name, from Trani.
Exactly. Very good. So next week, God willing, we're going to have an amazing panel. Dr. Seitcher and Ahuva and Liliana Torabayu.
Liliana.
And she's the judge, and we're going to talk about this whole situation with the Israeli Supreme Court. And I'll be here. I want to listen, but you know, I've been telling people, I've been using that phrase over and over again. I like to stay in my lane. I'm the rabbi. I'm not the politician, so I'm going to defer to them. They're doing all the research and the presentation. Maybe next week I'll finally understand what's going on. All right.
Miriam.
Michael, we're gonna try and
Annie,
stay
I
up
see
to
you,
the-
Annie.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good week, everybody.
Miriam,
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you, Laila
Miriam
Tov.
Bimblish.
Yeah.
Miriam, I want you.
Have a good
Miriam,
night.
call Regina.
Okay.
Annie,
Miriam.
Yes.
until people started
you call
leaving, I saw you were on the
Regina?
very bottom corner there. I couldn't see you. Now I see
On
you.
mine, I'm on the top. I wanted to tell you, when you were talking about the matzevot, and that we, you know, when we were doing my dad's, we looked at my mom, at his parents, and they didn't have the mother's names, but then one of my brothers said something about putting it in, and then you had looked into it for us. And because of it, we did it with my grandmother's name, who I'm actually named after. And that was the way to do it. And I'm very glad that you told us to do it the way we ended up doing it.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I wanted to tell you is my son Natan, which is Natan, spelled backwards Natan. He said, I'm not supposed to say my name backwards? Because you were saying your name backwards?
Miriam.
Well, at least his name's not toilet nasal drip, right?
Yes, exactly. Very nice, very nice.
All right. It's
All
good to
right.
see you, Annie.
Good seeing you.
Miriam.
Bye.
Call Regina, please. Miriam,
Yes.
call me.
call you? Okay.
Please, you have my number?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Lila Tov, everyone. If you
Lila
want to
Tov,
stay,
thank you,
that's good for
Rabbi.
me. Take care. Lila Tov, everyone.
Lila Tov.